I still remember the sound of his laughter echoing across the office floor. Ethan had one of those laughs that made everyone smile, loud, genuine, and a little awkward but real. You couldn't fake that kind of warmth. We started on the same day at Thompson & Reed Financial, both of us just 28, fresh suits and borrowed confidence. He was the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday, who helped interns when nobody else cared, who'd stay late to fix someone else's mistake. And I was the kind of man who wanted to rise faster. When I look back now, I can see how ambition, when mixed with insecurity, can make a man blind. At the time, I told myself it was just competition, that he'd understand. But what I did wasn't competition. It was betrayal, pure and quiet. The opportunity came when our manager announced a senior analyst position was opening up, one that could lead to management within a year. Both Ethan and I were being considered. We were equals in numbers, performance, even attitude. But where he had patience, I had hunger. One evening, I overheard something. Ethan was working late, talking on the phone to his wife. He mentioned a small error he found in a client report, one he hadn't had time to fix yet. It wasn't serious, just a mismatch in projected figures. But to the higher-ups, it could look sloppy if found at the wrong time. And I made sure it was found. I printed the report, marked the error, and left it on our supervisor's desk, anonymously, of course. The next day, when the manager called Ethan into his office, I pretended to be surprised. He came out with that same smile, though a little faded around the edges. "Guess I missed something small," he said quietly, sitting beside me. "Happens to the best of us." A week later, I was promoted. I still remember the congratulations, the pats on the back, the emails full of "You deserve this, David." And Ethan, he congratulated me too. He even took me out for lunch. I tried not to look at his eyes, because that's where the truth lives. He smiled, but there was pain beneath it. For months after that, things were different between us. Not openly, but quietly. We still worked together, but our jokes had pauses now. Our laughter ended too quickly. Then one day, Ethan handed in his resignation. He said he'd found an opportunity elsewhere, a new firm in the city. I wished him luck, and he thanked me like a gentleman. But as he walked away, something inside me whispered, "You've lost something you can't buy back." Years passed. I climbed higher, manager, then senior manager. My name meant something in the firm. But success has a strange way of making silence louder. The higher I went, the fewer people I trusted. The more I achieved, the emptier it all felt. I saw Ethan once at a conference in Chicago. He looked different, calmer, more grounded. We exchanged a polite nod from across the room. He didn't seem angry, and that somehow hurt more than if he'd cursed me. Life rolled on. I married, divorced, remarried again. Promotions came, and with them, sleepless nights. Somewhere along the line, I began to question the man I'd become. But by then, regret had turned into routine. Then came the day everything shifted. It was spring 4 years ago. Our company had just merged with a larger firm to stay competitive. New leadership, new structure, new rules. They said we'd all have to go through an evaluation, see who would stay and who would be replaced. I wasn't worried. After all, I was one of the top performers. But when I walked into the meeting room that morning, my confidence froze mid-step. Sitting at the head of the table was Ethan. Older, sharper, and more composed than I'd ever seen him. He wore a navy suit that fit perfectly, and that same warm but unreadable smile. My new division head. My new boss. For a moment, I couldn't move. My throat tightened, my palms grew cold. The universe had a cruel sense of humor. Or maybe it wasn't cruel, just fair. He looked up from the file, his eyes calm. "David," he said with that steady voice I remembered so well. "Good to see you again." Good to see you again. The words hit harder than any punishment could. Because in that moment, I realized karma doesn't need fire or fury. It simply waits. It lets you build the perfect stage for your own lesson. And mine had just begun. I don't remember much about the meeting itself. My mind was still stuck on the fact that Ethan was sitting in that chair, the one that used to belong to people who once evaluated both of us. Now it was his turn to decide who stayed and who didn't. The world has a quiet way of turning circles. He welcomed everyone with the same warmth he'd always had, his voice steady, confident, humble. "This merger is an opportunity for growth," he said. "I know transitions can be uncomfortable, but we'll get through this together." I watched him speak, the man I once betrayed. He looked composed, gracious. There wasn't even a hint of bitterness in his tone. But beneath his calm, I felt something else. Not revenge, not pride, something stronger. Peace. And that made me nervous. Because peace has power. When the meeting ended, people lingered around him, eager to introduce themselves, to impress him. He treated everyone equally. No one could have guessed our shared history, except me. He caught my eye as I tried to leave. "David," he said. "Got a moment?" I stopped, nodded, and followed him into his new office. It was bright, modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He gestured toward a chair. "Please sit." I sat. My heart was hammering harder than it should for a simple conversation. He smiled, the same polite, unreadable smile from years ago. "You've come a long way," he said. "I've been going through your record. Impressive work." I swallowed. "Thank you, Ethan. You too. I heard you joined Hallberg Finance after you left here. Didn't realize you'd end up leading this merger." He chuckled softly. "Neither did I. Life's strange like that. One door closes, another one opens, sometimes where you least expect it." There was a pause, just long enough for the memory of that old betrayal to hum quietly between us. He leaned back in his chair. "Anyway, I'm glad we're working together again. I think we'll make a good team." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah. Of course." But when I left his office, something inside me twisted. There was no anger in him. No resentment. And that unsettled me more than any grudge could. I almost wished he'd confronted me, shouted, accused, demanded an apology. Anything would have been easier than his calm acceptance. Over the next few weeks, life in the new structure began to settle. Departments were reassigned, roles redefined, and new teams formed. I was given responsibility over a smaller division than before. On paper, it made sense, reorganization, they called it. But deep down, I couldn't help but wonder if Ethan had decided it that way. Every time he spoke to me, his tone was professional, kind even. Never once did he hint at the past. He'd invite me into meetings, ask for my input, even compliment my analysis in front of others. But something about it all gnawed at me. It wasn't humiliation. It was grace. Because grace, when you don't deserve it, can feel heavier than punishment. One evening, I stayed late at the office. Most of the floor was dark except for the warm light spilling from Ethan's office. I walked past, hesitated, then saw him sitting alone, reading through reports. His posture was calm, unhurried. He looked content. Years ago, I would have said success looked like the corner office, the title, the salary. But seeing him there, peaceful and unbothered, I realized success wasn't about the chair you sat in. It was about how lightly you could sit in it. He looked up and noticed me. "Still here, David?" I nodded awkwardly. "Just finishing some end-of-month summaries." He smiled. "You always were dedicated." That word, dedicated, cut deeper than he probably intended. Because I wasn't. Not back then. I was desperate. There's a difference. We talked for a bit that night, small talk mostly. Family, travel, work. I learned he'd divorced a few years back too, but unlike me, he'd handled it with quiet dignity. He spoke about his daughter, how she'd just started college. His face softened when he mentioned her name. When I left his office, I felt something shift inside me. I'd spent years chasing power, but here was a man who had lost, rebuilt, and somehow found peace through it all. Over the following months, I began to notice more. He treated everyone with the same kindness: the interns, the assistants, even the custodians. People respected him not because of his title, but because he listened. He never raised his voice, never demanded authority. He earned it. I started watching him, quietly, almost studying him. He never seemed rushed, even when deadlines loomed. He made people feel seen. It was something I'd forgotten how to do. And yet, there were moments when I caught his eyes resting on me, not with anger, but with quiet understanding, as if he knew I was finally realizing something he'd known for years. The strangest part? He began giving me opportunities, the kind I used to fight for. He'd delegate high-profile projects, recommend me for presentations, and trust me with client decisions. At first, I thought it was some kind of subtle game, maybe his way of making me anxious, of letting me live in guilt. But it wasn't. He genuinely wanted me to succeed. That realization was harder to carry than the betrayal itself. Because when someone you wronged refuses to hate you, you're left facing only yourself. One afternoon, I joined a lunch meeting with him and a few executives. They were discussing future leadership roles for the upcoming fiscal year. Ethan turned to me midway through the discussion and said, "David's got a good strategic mind. I'd like him to lead the expansion project next quarter." Everyone nodded in agreement. I sat there stunned. Afterward, I caught him by the elevators. "Ethan, why did you do that?" He looked genuinely puzzled. "Do what?" "Recommend me. You could have picked anyone." He smiled faintly. "Because you're good at what you do. That's all that matters." His answer was simple, but it landed like a confession. Not his, mine. Because I realized what he didn't say: what you did years ago doesn't define you anymore. Unless you let it. That night, I went home and couldn't sleep. For the first time in years, I replayed the past not from my side, but his. The humiliation, the silent betrayal, the pain of losing something you'd earned. Yet he'd never let that pain turn into poison. He'd carried it with grace, and now that grace was teaching me more than punishment ever could. Slowly, I began changing without realizing it. I started mentoring junior staff, not because it helped my image, but because it felt right. I began apologizing. Small things at first: missed calls, delayed responses, careless comments. Eventually, I even found myself writing a letter I never sent. It began simply: "Ethan, there's something I never told you. Years ago, when that error report cost you your promotion, it was me." I wrote and deleted it 3 times that night. I didn't send it because deep down, I knew he already knew. Some truths don't need to be spoken, they just need to be lived differently. And maybe, that was the beginning of my redemption. The weeks that followed blurred into long days and late nights. On the surface, everything looked good. The company was thriving under Ethan's leadership, my projects were gaining recognition, and I was being considered for a regional leadership position. But inside, I felt a heaviness I couldn't explain. Success used to give me adrenaline. Now it only gave me silence. That same silence that fills a room after someone stops playing the piano, when all that's left is the echo of what used to be music. I'd look at Ethan during meetings, the way he spoke, the way people listened to him, and I'd feel this ache, a mixture of respect and regret. It was almost unbearable to know that I had tried to destroy a man like that. Then one afternoon, something small but significant happened. Ethan called me into his office. He was reviewing a series of client portfolios. "David," he said, "I'd like you to oversee the Baxter account directly. It's one of our most important clients." I frowned. "The Baxter account? I thought you were handling that yourself." He smiled. "I was. But I trust you with it now." It was an enormous opportunity, one that could cement my place in upper management. But it also terrified me, because this time, I wanted to earn it. Over the next month, I poured everything into that account. I worked weekends, refined presentations, stayed up until dawn making sure every detail was flawless. Ethan would occasionally check in, never to correct, only to guide. "You don't need to prove anything," he told me once, almost reading my thoughts. "Just do it the right way." The right way. Those 3 words haunted me more than any accusation could. Then, as life often does, it tested me. It was a Friday morning when I received a confidential email, one that wasn't meant for me. It contained preliminary financial data from one of our rival firms. If I used it, I could easily outmaneuver them in negotiations for the Baxter project. It was tempting, painfully tempting. My old instincts woke up immediately, whispering in my ear, "Nobody will know. This is how the game is played." I stared at that email for a long time. 10 years ago, I wouldn't have hesitated. But I wasn't the same man anymore. I closed my laptop, stood up, and walked straight to Ethan's office. He looked up from his desk as I entered. "Everything all right?" "I got something I shouldn't have," I said, placing my phone on his desk. "An email from the competition. I didn't open the attachments. Thought you should know." He read it briefly, then looked at me, really looked at me. There was no surprise in his expression, only quiet understanding. "You did the right thing," he said softly. And then he smiled, that same genuine smile I hadn't seen since before everything fell apart between us. "You've come a long way, David." Those words meant more to me than any promotion ever could. But karma, as I was learning, doesn't come in straight lines. It curves and bends through moments that test your sincerity. A few weeks later, the company faced a crisis. One of our smaller clients accused the firm of mismanaging funds. A routine audit turned into a full-scale investigation. I wasn't directly involved, but one of my team members had handled part of the client's paperwork, and by extension, so had I. Ethan was out of the country at the time. The news spread quickly, whispers growing like wildfire. David's department might be under review. I hadn't done anything wrong, but when guilt lives in your past, even innocence feels fragile. That night, I sat alone in my office long after everyone had left. The city lights outside blurred through the glass, and for the first time in years, I felt small again. Vulnerable. The same feeling I once caused Ethan to feel. It was as if life was gently holding up a mirror. When Ethan returned, he called me into his office immediately. I expected questions, maybe even suspicion. But he simply gestured for me to sit. "I've read the report," he said calmly. "They'll clear your department. It's just a misunderstanding." Relief washed over me. "Thank you for believing me." He leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "David, belief isn't something I give lightly. You've earned it. But there's something you should understand." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "When I left this company years ago, I was angry at first. I felt betrayed, yes, but that anger didn't help me. It only kept me tied to something that had already ended. So I let it go. Not for you but for me." He looked at me directly. "We all make mistakes. But the real test isn't whether we pay for them, it's whether we grow from them." I wanted to say something, to confess everything right there. But he stopped me with a slight shake of his head, as if he already knew. "Don't say it," he said softly. "Just keep doing the right thing. That's enough." That night, I walked home instead of taking the subway. The air was cool, the streets quiet. I thought about how life had brought me full circle, not through punishment, but through reflection. I'd spent half my life climbing a ladder that leaned against the wrong wall. And now, somehow, the man I wronged had become the person teaching me how to stand again. Weeks turned into months. The investigation cleared me completely. Ethan's leadership turned the crisis into an opportunity. The company's reputation actually grew stronger. My division was praised for its transparency, and I was publicly acknowledged for my cooperation. But inside, I didn't feel pride. I felt peace. The kind of peace that comes when you stop running from your own shadow. One evening, Ethan invited me to dinner with a few senior partners. It was casual, just conversation, laughter, stories from our early careers. Afterward, when everyone left, Ethan and I stayed behind, finishing our drinks quietly. He looked at me, a small smile on his face. "Do you ever think about the past?"
"All the time," I admitted. He nodded. "Me too."
But not in anger. I think about how necessary it was. How some lessons don't come cheap. I studied his expression. There was no trace of resentment. Only calm acceptance, the kind that takes years to earn. "You know," he said after a pause, "back when I lost that promotion, I thought it was the end of everything. But if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have left. Wouldn't have started over. Wouldn't be here now." He smiled faintly. "So maybe you did me a favor without realizing it." I laughed softly, though guilt still burned inside me. "You always find a way to forgive people, don't you?"
He shook his head. "No, David.
I just learned that holding on costs more than letting go." That night, I went home and stood by my apartment window, watching the city lights. For the first time, I understood what real revenge looked like. Not anger, not payback, but peace. Ethan hadn't needed to destroy me. He just lived better, kinder, freer. And that alone was enough to make me face everything I'd buried. But life wasn't finished teaching me yet.
A few months later, Ethan fell ill.
It started small, fatigue, headaches, but soon he was diagnosed with a heart condition. Nothing too severe, but enough to require surgery. When he was hospitalized, I visited him often. The roles had reversed. The man I once envied now lay in a hospital bed, and I was the one standing beside him. He'd smile every time I came in. "You know, I never thought you'd make a good nurse," he'd joke. I'd laugh. "I'm just here for the free coffee." But behind the humor, I felt something deeper, gratitude. For being given the chance to show care instead of ambition. To give back, in small ways, what I'd taken. One evening, just before his surgery, he said something I'll never forget. "David, if something happens to me, take care of the team, will you?"
I nodded, my throat tight. "Don't talk like that. You'll be fine."
He smiled gently.
"I will.
But still, just promise me."
"I promise," I whispered.
The surgery went well. He recovered slowly, but steadily. When he finally returned to work months later, everyone cheered. I stood at the back of the room, clapping quietly, realizing I wasn't jealous anymore. I was grateful. For the first time in decades, I felt free. That was the moment I understood something profound, that karma isn't punishment.
It's education.
It doesn't destroy you to make you suffer, it humbles you to make you understand. Ethan never tried to hurt me. Life didn't need to, either. All it had to do was give me time, enough time to see myself clearly. And that clarity hurt, but it also healed. The following year passed more quietly than any before it. Ethan's recovery was slow, but steady. He returned to the office not with the drive of a man trying to prove something, but with the calmness of one who no longer needed to. He delegated more responsibilities, trusted his managers, spent more time mentoring young professionals. His heart condition had softened him even further, or maybe it had simply revealed who he'd been all along. I worked closely with him during that time. The Baxter project had become one of the firm's biggest successes, and our partnership was often cited as an example of collaboration done right. People saw us as a model duo, two leaders in sync. Nobody knew that years earlier, one of us had destroyed the other's career. And that irony stayed with me every single day. One afternoon, we were reviewing annual reports in his office.
He looked pale, exhausted.
"You should rest," I said. "You've been pushing too hard lately." He smiled faintly. "It's hard to rest when you know time's speeding up."
I frowned. "What do you mean?"
He hesitated, then leaned back. "The doctors found something else during my last checkup. Nothing definite yet, but it could be serious."
A chill ran through me. Ethan. He raised a hand. Don't look at me like that.
I'm not gone yet.
He smiled softly.
I just want to make sure I leave things in good hands.
He paused, studying me.
That means you.
I blinked. Me. Yes.
You've grown more than anyone I've worked with.
You're ready.
His faith in me should have felt like an honor, and it did, but it also broke something open inside me. For years, I'd carried the weight of what I'd done, never fully forgiving myself. I thought I could balance it by being better, by helping others, by staying loyal. But now, with him trusting me like this, I couldn't keep the truth buried any longer. Ethan, I said quietly, there's something you need to know.
He looked up, curious. I took a deep breath. My voice trembled.
Years ago, when you lost that promotion, the report error, I was the one who exposed it.
Silence. He didn't move, didn't speak.
Just looked at me, the same calm, unreadable expression he always had.
I swallowed hard.
You didn't deserve that.
I was jealous.
I wanted to get ahead, and He raised a hand gently, stopping me.
I know.
Those two words hit me harder than any outburst ever could. He leaned back, sighing softly. I've known for years, David.
I froze. You knew. He nodded slowly.
I suspected at first. Then, a few months after I left, someone told me what really happened. But by then, I'd already decided not to care. I felt the air leave my lungs. Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you tell me? He smiled faintly. What would have been the point? I was angry for a while. But anger doesn't heal. It only holds you hostage. He looked me in the eye. You think karma came for you through me.
But it didn't.
It came through you.
Through your own conscience.
You've been paying that debt for years, David, not because I demanded it, but because you couldn't live with the man you were. I felt my throat tighten, shame flooding through me. You should have hated me.
He shook his head. Hate's too heavy to carry.
I chose to forgive because I wanted peace, not because you deserved it. He smiled gently. And now I think you've earned it. That conversation changed everything. It stripped away whatever mask of pride I had left. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to apologize, to fall apart, to beg for forgiveness, but none of that seemed right. So I did what I hadn't done in years. I sat in silence and listened. He looked out the window, his voice low. You know, when I left the company, I thought it was a failure. But in hindsight, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to build myself again, from scratch. I learned who I was without titles or recognition. He turned back to me. Sometimes, David, losing something teaches you what you really value. And sometimes, karma doesn't punish, it redirects. That night, I couldn't sleep. His words replayed in my mind over and over. Karma doesn't punish. It redirects. For so long, I'd thought of karma as justice, the universe balancing scales. But now I saw it differently. Karma wasn't a sentence, it was a mirror. It shows you who you've been, until you finally decide to change. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice small shifts in my own behavior. I was more patient with people. I listened more, judged less. The office felt different too, calmer, kinder, as if Ethan's way of leading had begun to ripple through everyone. Then one morning, he called me into his office again. He looked tired but peaceful. I've decided to step down, he said. The board's approved my retirement. I'll be moving to the countryside, somewhere quiet. I stared at him. Just like that. He smiled. Just like that. It's time. He handed me a sealed envelope. Inside is my formal recommendation to the board. For your promotion. I shook my head immediately. No, Ethan. I can't. He interrupted gently. You can. And you will. Because this time, You've earned it the right way.
I stood there, speechless.
He continued, his tone soft but firm. I've watched you grow into a man I respect deeply. You've carried guilt, yes, but you've also carried responsibility. You've rebuilt trust, mentored others, done good work. That's redemption. He smiled faintly. Don't refuse it out of guilt. Accept it as a chance to do better.
Tears stung my eyes.
Ethan, I don't deserve.
Maybe not, he said, his voice kind.
But sometimes life gives us what we need, not what we deserve. He stood and extended his hand.
Take care of them, David. Lead with compassion.
That's how you repay your debts. I took his hand, and in that moment, I felt years of unspoken words dissolve into quiet understanding. After he retired, we kept in touch. He'd send postcards from small coastal towns, pictures of sunsets, handwritten notes about simple things, fishing, reading, long walks. His handwriting always looked steady, peaceful. The office felt emptier without him. People still respected me, but I never tried to be him. I just tried to honor what he'd taught me. Months later, I received a call one morning.
It was his daughter. Her voice trembled. "Mr. Collins," she said softly.
"I just wanted you to know. Dad passed away last night."
Peacefully. In his sleep. I closed my eyes. For a long time, I couldn't speak.
She continued, "He mentioned you in his journal. He said you'd become one of his greatest lessons, and one of his proudest." After we hung up, I sat at my desk for hours. Outside the window, the city kept moving, unaware, indifferent. But inside me, everything was still. Later that evening, I drove to the coast, the one he'd written about so often. I stood there as the wind whipped through the tall grass, watching the sun dip into the horizon. The sky was painted gold and pink, and for the first time in years, I felt peace that didn't sting. It wasn't forgiveness from him that freed me, it was the understanding that forgiveness had already happened long ago. I picked up a small stone from the shore, held it for a moment, then let it fall into the waves. "That's for you, Ethan," I whispered. "Thank you for teaching me how to live." The weeks after his passing were quiet. I officially took his position, but my leadership style was nothing like before. I no longer chased recognition. I focused on people,
on trust, on kindness.
Whenever I faced a difficult decision, I'd hear his voice in my head, "Do it the right way."
It became my compass.
And strangely, once I stopped seeking success, it came easier.
Clients trusted me more. Employees opened up.
The office atmosphere shifted, from pressure to purpose. One day, while mentoring a young employee, I caught myself saying something Ethan had once told me: "Sometimes the best thing life can give you is a second chance to do things right." The young man smiled, not realizing how deeply those words were rooted. That night, I looked out over the city again, the same view I'd stared at years ago when guilt kept me awake. But now it felt different. The skyline wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was simply life, messy, beautiful, fair in its own strange way. And in that moment, I realized that karma hadn't punished me. It had educated me, slowly, patiently, through the very life I'd built. Karma doesn't shout when it arrives. It walks in quietly, takes a seat, and lets you feel the weight of what you've sown. That's what those last few months at the firm felt like, a slow unveiling of everything I'd built on shaky ground. I used to think power meant control, but sitting across from Ethan day after day, I began to see that real power was peace. And I had none of it. After the merger, I noticed how the team naturally gravitated toward Ethan. He didn't command attention. He earned it through patience, empathy, and quiet confidence. He was the same man I once betrayed, yet somehow, he'd become even more composed. The kind of leader I'd always tried to pretend to be. Meanwhile, my position became smaller in every sense. My title remained the same, but my influence evaporated. The new systems and workflows didn't require my approval. My name wasn't on the decision memos anymore. I was still there, But I didn't matter. It's a peculiar thing, watching yourself fade in an environment where you once ruled. Like standing in a room that used to echo with your voice, and realizing it doesn't recognize your sound anymore. But Ethan, he never humiliated me.
Not once.
He didn't assign me meaningless tasks, didn't publicly correct me, didn't even bring up our past. His silence was the most merciful, and the most punishing, response he could have given. One morning, I walked into his office. Not out of courage, but out of exhaustion. I couldn't carry the guilt anymore. He was reviewing a set of quarterly reports when I knocked on his doorframe.
"Got a minute?" I asked.
He looked up, and a faint smile touched his lips.
"Of course, David. Come in."
I sat across from him, the same seat I once imagined myself owning. The air between us was heavy, but not tense, more like something long overdue had finally arrived. "I owe you an apology," I said. My voice trembled, though I tried to keep it steady. "For what happened years ago." He didn't say anything, just leaned back slightly in his chair.
I went on.
"I should have told you then, it was me."
"The report."
"I was the one who brought it to the manager's desk. You didn't deserve what happened."
There it was. The truth, out in the open.
It didn't echo or explode, it just settled between us like dust. Ethan stayed silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I figured it was you," he said quietly. "Back then, I didn't know for sure. But people talk and I had a feeling."
I felt my chest tighten.
"And you never said anything?" He smiled faintly. "What would have been the point? Life has a way of teaching its own lessons." That simple sentence broke something inside me, and healed something too. "I'm sorry, Ethan," I said, meaning it more than I'd ever meant anything.
"Truly."
He studied me, his eyes kind but unyielding. "You don't need to say it for me," he said. "Say it for yourself. You've been carrying it longer than you should." That day, I walked out of his office lighter, and emptier. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a victim of the system or circumstance. I saw myself clearly. I was the architect of my own downfall. But karma wasn't done with me yet. It still had one final lesson to teach. A few weeks later, the company announced a restructuring. Entire departments were being merged, some dissolved. When the list of retained managers was released, my name wasn't there. It didn't come as a shock, more like a quiet confirmation of what I already knew. Ethan called me into his office that afternoon. "David," he said gently, "I wanted to tell you before the official notice goes out. Your position's being dissolved. It's not personal, the new structure just doesn't fit the old hierarchy." I nodded slowly. I'd expected as much. Still, hearing it from him, the man I once betrayed, carried a poetic weight. He slid a folder across the table. "There's a good severance package in here. And a recommendation letter." I meant every word of it. I opened the folder, my eyes scanning the letter. It was generous, kind even. I looked up at him, confusion mixing with gratitude. "You didn't have to do this," I said softly.
He smiled. "I know.
But someone once taught me that doing the right thing isn't about who deserves it. It's about who needs it."
For a moment, I couldn't speak.
I wanted to ask him how he could be so calm, so forgiving. But maybe that was his quiet revenge. Not revenge in the cruel sense, but in the karmic one. He rose above what I had been, and that was enough. As I left his office for the last time, I paused at the door. "You turned out to be a better man than me," I said quietly. He looked up from his papers, that soft smile returning.
"No," he said.
"Just a man who learned differently." Leaving the company wasn't the end, it was the beginning of something humbler. I spent months trying to find work. My confidence, once unshakable, had become fragile. I interviewed at smaller firms, consulting companies, even startups. Each rejection stung less than the last because with each one, I began to see it as balance, not punishment. Eventually, I found a position at a small local firm. Not glamorous, not powerful, but peaceful. The people there reminded me of how Ethan used to be, honest, grounded, content with enough. And that's where I began rebuilding myself. It wasn't easy, shedding the old skin of arrogance and ambition. For years, I'd measured my worth by titles and attention. Now I found meaning in small things, mentoring younger colleagues, helping them avoid the mistakes I once made, treating people as humans instead of stepping stones. I started writing again, too, short reflections about workplace ethics and personal growth. I never mentioned Ethan by name, but his spirit lingered in every line. To my surprise, people responded. They said my words gave them clarity, helped them slow down, reminded them that life isn't a race. It made me realize something profound. The truest revenge isn't winning, it's transforming. A year later, I ran into Ethan again. We were both at a charity event for young professionals in finance. He spotted me across the room and walked over, his usual calm presence preceding him. "David," he said warmly. "It's good to see you." I smiled. "You too, Ethan." We talked for a while, about work, life, the strange paths we take. There was no bitterness, no awkwardness. Just two men who'd walked through fire and come out different. Before we parted, I said, "You probably don't know this, but working under you changed me." He chuckled softly. "I didn't do much." "You did more than you think," I said. "You showed me what real success looks like." He nodded thoughtfully. Maybe we both learned something we needed to. And that was it. No grand closure, no cinematic ending. Just quiet understanding, the kind that lingers long after the words fade. When I got home that night, I poured myself a glass of water, sat by the window, and thought about everything that had happened. Karma had been patient with me. It didn't come with thunder or fire. It came through reflection, through humility, through the mirror of another man's grace. I betrayed a friend once, and lost everything that mattered. But in losing, I found something deeper, awareness. And as I sat there, looking at the city lights below, I realized the truth Ethan had lived by all along. Sometimes silence is the best revenge. Because silence doesn't destroy, it teaches. It doesn't shout, it transforms. And in that stillness, I finally found peace. It's been nearly 10 years since that chapter of my life closed. 10 years since I walked out of Ethan's office with a folder in hand and a quiet ache in my chest. A lot changes in a decade. Some things fade. Others stay sharp as ever. What never left me was the memory of that moment. The calm in his eyes when he forgave me without saying the word forgiveness. That day marked the true turning point of my life, though I didn't know it then. Now, at 52, I live a simpler life. I run a small consulting agency out of a quiet building downtown. No large teams, no corporate hierarchies, no race to the top. Just a handful of people who respect each other, share ideas, and work with purpose. Sometimes, the younger employees ask about my career before this, about the big firms, the mergers, the promotions. I tell them stories, but never in the way they expect. They want strategies and shortcuts. I give them honesty instead. Success without peace, I tell them, is just noise dressed in gold. They usually smile politely, not fully understanding. I don't blame them. I didn't understand it either when I was their age. Back then, I thought the only way to win was to be faster, sharper, louder. But over time, life taught me something that ambition never could, that there's no trophy for betraying your own values. Every Friday afternoon, after everyone leaves, I sit by the office window and look out at the city skyline. It used to represent power to me, those towers of glass and light, full of people chasing recognition. Now I see something else, countless souls trying to prove they matter, when they already do. I sometimes think about Ethan and wonder if he knows how much he changed me. We still exchange messages now and then, short, warm, uncomplicated. He's retired now, living somewhere near the coast with his family. He sends photos of sunsets sometimes, and I send back words of gratitude I never stop meaning. It's strange how life can bring you full circle, how the person you once wronged can become your greatest teacher. Karma didn't destroy me. It rebuilt me piece by piece, in the image of the man I betrayed. There's one memory that always stays with me, one that captures everything I've learned. A few years ago, a young analyst named Claire joined my firm. Bright, driven, and full of fire, she reminded me of myself at 30. One evening, she came to my office with a dilemma. "There's a position opening next month," she said. "And another colleague, Marcus, is also applying. He's good, really good. But I found an error in one of his reports. If I bring it up to management, it might lower his chances." Her voice was calm, but her eyes revealed the conflict inside. I looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "Tell me something, Claire. Do you think Marcus would do the same to you?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No. He's honest. Maybe too honest." I nodded slowly. "Then you already know what to do." She exhaled, tension leaving her shoulders. "You're right." Before she left, I said, "For what it's worth, I once stood exactly where you are. I made the wrong choice. It took me years to understand that what we do to others, we eventually do to ourselves." She paused at the door, thoughtful. "Did it really come back to you?" I smiled faintly. "Oh, it did. Just not in the way I expected. Life has a way of bringing your reflection back to you, sometimes through people, sometimes through silence." She nodded slowly and left the office. That night, I sat there alone for a while, remembering the man I once was, the one who chose ambition over integrity, approval over peace. I thought about how Ethan must have felt the day I betrayed him, how heavy that kind of disappointment must have been. And yet, when life gave him a chance to return the favor, he didn't take it. That was his revenge. Quiet, graceful, complete. He didn't need to hurt me. He just let karma do its work, and it did. In time, I came to understand what karma really means. It's not some invisible hand that punishes. It's balance, the universe restoring order to what we disturb. It teaches us by showing us our own reflection in others. When I betrayed Ethan, I thought I was getting ahead. But I was only planting the seed of my own lesson. Years later, that seed grew into the very tree that shaded me when I needed humility the most. And that's how karma works, not through destruction, but through design. Sometimes, I visit the park near my office during lunch breaks. There's a small bench by the pond, under an old oak tree. I often sit there with a notebook, writing reflections, things I've learned, things I wish I'd known. One afternoon, a young man sat beside me, talking loudly on his phone. He was complaining about his boss, about how unfair the workplace was, about how he deserved more. His frustration reminded me of myself years ago, burning with entitlement, convinced that the world owed him recognition. When he hung up, I smiled and said, "You sound like you've got a lot on your mind." He laughed nervously. "Yeah, sorry. Just one of those days." "Let me tell you something," I said quietly. "Sometimes life delays what you think you deserve, just to give you time to become the person who can handle it." He looked at me curiously, as if trying to decide whether I was wise or just old. But I didn't need him to understand. The lesson wasn't for that day, it was for later. It took me years to realize that forgiveness isn't about others. It's about reclaiming the peace we lost while trying to be right. Ethan forgave me without saying it, and that silence became my teacher. I've carried that lesson into everything I do, with colleagues, friends, family. I don't chase apologies anymore. I don't seek revenge. I let life balance itself. Because it always does. Now, when I look back, I don't see a story of betrayal anymore. I see a story of awakening. A man who lost his way chasing success, only to find wisdom through the very person he wronged. Ethan's calmness was his strength. My guilt was my teacher. Together, they wrote a story only karma could have authored. I sometimes imagine what I'd say if I could meet my younger self again, the one who slipped that report onto the manager's desk.
I wouldn't scold him.
I'd just sit beside him and say, "You think you're winning, but you're really setting the stage for your own lesson. Be kind now, or life will teach you kindness later." And maybe he'd laugh it off, the way I once did. But I'd still say it. Because some truths deserve to be said, even if they're only understood years later. As I close this chapter, one line stays etched in my heart. Something I learned not through books or mentors, but through life itself.
Karma doesn't punish. It educates.
It shows us who we are, then patiently waits for us to see it. And when we finally do, that's when peace begins. So if you ever find yourself standing at a crossroads, tempted to choose ambition over honesty, gain over loyalty, silence over truth, remember this. You're not choosing a moment. You're choosing the kind of lesson life will teach you later.
I betrayed a friend once.
And years later, karma brought me to his desk again. Not to destroy me, but to save me from who I was becoming. And that, I've learned, is the kindest kind of revenge life can give. Because sometimes, silence truly is the best revenge. Not because it hurts others, but because it heals you.